Welcome back to another episode of Deep Quotes. I'm D.
I'm App.
I'm Pod.
And we have a quote that, even at the time of recording, is fairly old, but we wanted to... We figured we would get around to it eventually. Not sure how old it's going to be at the time of posting this, but it's the 30 to 50 feral hogs quote. And for those of you that don't remember, the quote is, "Legit question for rural Americans. How do I kill the 30 to 50 feral hogs that run into my yard within 3 to 5 minutes while my small kids play?" So some people were saying, oh, he's just joking. He's just trying to make a point about guns. Well, first of all, he started by saying legit question for rural Americans. So he's aiming the audience to which he's trying to talk to people who might actually have a problem with this or have...
Right, you're not going to find these hogs in the city.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That being said, for people who aren't aware, wild hogs are actually a huge, huge problem, particularly in the Midwest and some of the central southern states.
Has a lot of problems with them.
Texas, I think there have been a lot of problems in Missouri, Iowa. The estimated damages caused annually from hogs is, I think, on the order of $1 to $3 billion per year. It's a very large amount of monetary damages, and they do put people at risk. So there is actually a hog problem out there, and I think most people are aware that there are hunting seasons. Like, you can hunt deer, but only for a week out of the year if you're using rifles, and like a couple weeks if you're using bows, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Most animals have hunting seasons. There are a couple of things that don't. There'll be small game. If it's on your property, you're allowed to kill a certain number of them, again, depending on what the game is. Hogs, essentially, according to the law, if you see one, you can kill one. Assuming that you are permitted to discharge a firearm or use that weapon where you are, you can kill them. Also, an example of crossbows have a lot of legal ramifications on them of you're only allowed to use crossbows to hunt if you're disabled or over 65 or if you're shooting a hog. Because hogs are incredibly problematic. They come in large groups. 30 to 50 is fairly common of seeing a herd of hogs. I don't know if a herd is the right term, but it sounds like it. They'll come through and just rip up cornfields or rip up vegetation and destroy the ground, also destroying property. They'll run through fences, and these hogs are on the order of anywhere between 200 and I've heard up to about 700 or 800 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're not small things by any
They're not
means.
small, and they're also can be aggressive,
Mm-hmm.
which is the other piece regarding like, oh, well, my kids are out there.
Right. I think that's
Right.
something that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of. They can really hurt people.
Well, and they have tusks.
Yeah.
So they are actually dangerous. And even if they're not trying to bite you, if they get scared and they're running as a herd, you have 30 to 50 several 100-pound animals in a running panic.
Yeah, you don't want to be anywhere close to that.
If you have a kid that's 50 pounds, they're significantly smaller than the pig, and there's 50 of these guys running in a panic, they're not really going to stop for the kid, and they're known for just running right through things, including fences, so a kid is not really going to stand very much in their way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think kind of the interesting thing about this post was the reaction from people in cities whose definition of a backyard is wildly different than someone in the middle of the country's definition of a backyard.
Yes,
right. Oh, my kids are playing, like in the city, my kids are playing out in the backyard where there's maybe a couple 100 square feet.
Yeah, it's not too bad. You can always keep an eye on them. Whereas out in the country, like, I have some family that own several acres of land. You know, you may not be able to see the kids from the house when they're out playing in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and particularly in Texas, we're sometimes not even talking about a couple of acres. You may have 100 acres of property. You kids want to go outside, go for a walk, go out into the woods,
They'll
take a
play in
four-wheeler out.
They may play in the neighbor's yard as well if the neighbors also have kids. So their playground may be...
It's massive. It's going to be several
hundreds of acres.
Your kids may be very far away from the house, and particularly just with where you're living, if you have 10 acres, that's probably because you live really far away from any help. So even if it's unlikely that a kid would get hurt, if a kid gets trampled by a pig and you need to get him to a hospital, that hospital could be 45 minutes to an hour away, depending on where in the country you're living.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the reason that he aimed it particularly at rural Americans is because he's not trying to talk about from the perspective of people in the cities, where it's like, yeah, okay, you're fairly close to a hospital, you have ready access to other people helping you, and outside, out even in a park, you're really close to being able to be inside and being protected from the pigs.
Yeah, you see a bunch of pigs coming down over the horizon or through the
you're gonna
streets.
There is no horizon in the streets.
It's faster for your kids to just run into the house and go upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
The pigs probably aren't going to follow you up the stairs, and if they do, like, sorry, you're now in a horror movie, and you should probably wake up now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And in the cities, if there's a bunch of pigs running around, that's a point where the police will get involved and like, okay, yeah, we need to deal with this.
Yeah, and they'll be involved really fast.
Right.
Yeah, and they're going to use semi-automatic, quote-unquote, assault weapons to do that.
Yeah, the weapons that they're going to use are going to have enough capacity to deal with 30 to 50 feral hogs. And I think that this had a massive discussion from both sides arguing various points of, you don't need an assault rifle to handle any situation. And some people were using this as an example of, actually, there are 30 to 50 of them. Even standard magazines for ARs carry 30 rounds. Mm-hmm. And this is something that, as an aside, is interesting from the anti-gun groups saying high capacity magazines are anything over 10. Actually, it's hard to find magazines for AR style weapons that are less than or fewer than 30 rounds. 30 rounds is the standard magazine size. It's very uncommon to see magazines that are 10. So normally they're 30, and even if you have 30, assuming that you have a very high hit rate and you know exactly what you're doing with the gun, you're still not going to be hitting all the hogs. Also, I've spoken with some people that have lived out in these circumstances and have gone hog hunting using 30-06 rounds, which, for reference, was the primary round used in World War II by soldiers. So it was a round designed with a lot of stopping power. Almost all quote-unquote assault weapons do not actually use 30-06. They use a significantly weaker round. So 30-06 is a very powerful round. And he said that he's had circumstances where there was a several 100-pound pig. He shot it in the head with a 30-06, but it was a glancing blow. So it kind of fell over, got back up, was very upset, and proceeded to run through a fence and disappear into the forest. So and that's not to say that, these things are invincible, but they are notoriously very difficult to kill. Even when you land a shot on them with high-powered rifles, they don't necessarily die. They are very difficult to kill, and having more rounds at your disposal makes it significantly more likely, number one, that you will be able to hit them, number one. Number two, continue to hit them until you get into a critical area that can disable the pig. And number three, can maintain your position as a dangerous predator to scare them away. One loud bang or two loud bangs from like a double barrel shotgun or something along those lines may not be enough to scare them away. And to bring up a quote from Joe Biden back in I think 2010s or something around 2010, saying, you don't need an assault rifle if someone's trying to rob you. Just take a double barrel shotgun and fire 2 blasts out into the air. Which, okay, number one, that's illegal because you're firing out into the air. And if you're trying to use that defense methodology for hogs, now you just fired into the air, which is a crime. Number one. Number two, now you have an empty gun.
Yeah, that's not going to help you against the hogs.
Right. So having a weapon that can actually maintain a rate of fire to be able to face a large number of dangerous animals is a legitimate reason to be able to have a firearm, if only out in the country.
Yeah, and hogs aren't the only thing that people out in the country may need protection from.
Coyotes.
Coyotes would be one. Think of the entirety of Alaska, you get some polar bears heading south.
Yeah, you got to be prepared for
Like,
them.
If they get into your area and they start attacking you, and they're very aggressive animals.
Mm-hmm. There are areas, I believe, in Alaska where I know that there are areas of the world where it's actually required that if you're going out in a group, someone has to be trained on a firearm and have a firearm actively with them and loaded.
Yeah, that's pretty much anywhere in Alaska that's outside of the major cities.
Mm-hmm. And even if it's not legally required, it's a very good idea to do that because you need to be able to protect yourselves. And again, Alaska is kind of an outlier in this regard, but there are times where there are polar bear warnings and, hey, we're canceling Halloween trick-or-treating because we can't have kids outside when there are polar bears running around.
Well, I mean, Alaska isn't a outlier, but the outliers kind of are the ones that have to decide what the federal law is.
If the federal law
if
says
the federal law says no guns at all, but Alaska needs guns because they have bear problems,
they're going to be in trouble.
But again, we're not just talking about Alaska as the only outlier.
Yeah. Texas has a lot of problems as well.
And not just with hogs. There's mountain lions, again, coyotes. That's generally for, they'll go after livestock, foxes, wolves in some cases in some areas of the country, bears in some areas of the country. That all across the country, there are always going to be dangerous animals that you may need lethal protection for.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the main argument that people were making on the pro-gun side of the aisle is while in the city there may be less of a reason to have a semi-automatic weapon, if you make a countrywide law saying all of these are banned, you are significantly weakening the position of people that are living out in the country to be able to protect their lives, their livelihood, their children, their property. And when they can't protect their property, that number that is from $1 to $3 billion of property damage, that's with people being very leniently able to defend themselves, protected under the law. If you make it almost impossible for them to protect themselves with lethal means, that number is going to go significantly up, which people in the city will see because the price of their food is going to go up because food gets destroyed by these bands of hogs.
Yeah, so it's going to come around and get them no matter what happens.
Right. And I think that the major backlash from the anti-gun side of the aisle was talking about this is just an excuse to have weapons that you like. And it's like, no, there actually are problems that you don't see because you're in a very protected bubble living inside of the city.
Right. And sometimes I kind of wish that those people in the city would come out more into the country and see some of those problems, because this especially is a major one.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it also, I think it also plays into the idea of just, do you believe as a person that guns protect against bad things happening? And there are cases on both sides, but as an example, at the time of this recording, fairly recently, a large protest happened in Virginia, where Virginia has been trying to pass gun legislation to severely neuter people's abilities to own firearms and carry firearms. And there was a backlash from the gun owning community. They had, I believe, just over 20,000 people show up with guns, all different kinds of firearms, high power firearms, 50 cals, lots of tactical gear. But there was also representation from the black community, from the LGBT community, people waving LGBT flags, while also carrying guns in support of it. And there were no crimes. There was one arrest, and they were arrested because someone was wearing a mask, and they repeatedly refused to take the mask off by police, and then they were eventually arrested. But 20,000 people carrying firearms, no crimes. So I think that could be used as an example of having firearms ensures that people will be safer, even in the cities, because everyone knows everyone has a firearm. Therefore, I'm not going to act out on it.
Yeah,
No.
like even if you're a crazy person who's like, I'm going to kill a bunch of people in this protest, that's not the protest to do it in.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Because you're everyone else is going to draw on you.
One of the least likely places for there to be a mass shooting is at a gun range, because everyone is going to turn on you. So, but again, we're kind of getting away from the topic of using guns for defense out in rural situations. And I think a large aspect of the disagreement around this quote is just from the fact that people living in the cities don't have a good grasp on living alone out in the country. That if you're in the city and you hear a knock on your door, okay, maybe someone needs to use the phone. If I'm living 2 miles away from my nearest neighbor and I hear a knock on the door, what the heck was that?
Especially if you weren't expecting somebody.
You're not expecting anyone. It's early in the morning, and even if it's not a knock on the door, you hear loud rustling or banging outside of your house. What the heck is that? What is moving the fence outside of my house? And if it's moving the fence, what risk does that pose to me, my property, my family, and my livelihood? And being able to actually act in a defensive way is critical to the survival of farmers. If it's critical to the survival of farmers, it's critical to the food supply, which means it's critical to everyone. And I think that that's an aspect that a lot of people in the cities were missing, even though, oh, well, this doesn't apply to us in the cities. It does, because your food comes from the people that it applies to. You guys want to add anything?
Nope.
I think we're good.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you guys next time.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to this discussion. Your interest really means a lot to us. If you want to help support this podcast and our goal of sparking discussions and bringing people together, check out how to contribute in the description. Happy deeping!
The content of this podcast does not reflect the views and opinions held by anyone involved. We will frequently be playing the devil's advocate strictly for the purpose of exploration of ideas and not as an endorsement of any subsequent action. We condemn all acts of violence other than those of self-defense against physical harm.